For thousands of years, humanity has built monuments, carved symbols into stone, and left behind traces of knowledge that still puzzle the modern world. Across deserts, mountains, and forgotten jungles, ruins stand as silent witnesses to civilizations that once flourished with remarkable skill and understanding. Some structures display engineering precision that seems far ahead of their time, while certain artifacts reveal technologies and ideas that historians are still struggling to fully explain. Each excavation uncovers new clues. Yet the deeper researchers dig into the past, the more mysteries appear. Who truly built these incredible places? How did ancient people achieve such astonishing feats without modern tools? And what knowledge might still remain hidden beneath the ruins of the ancient world? In the vast desert landscape of coastal Peru, where wind and sand slowly erase the traces of forgotten civilizations, a strange row of stone towers rises along a narrow ridge. At first glance, they look almost accidental, like the broken teeth of some ancient structure lost to time. But when the sun rises over the desert horizon, something extraordinary happens. The light aligns perfectly with the gaps between these towers, creating a silent and precise celestial marker in stone. This mysterious place is known today as Chankillo, one of the most remarkable and enigmatic archaeological sites in the ancient world. Chankillo dates back more than 2,000 years to around the 4th century BCE, long before the rise of famous Andean civilizations such as the Inca. The culture that built it left few written records and little direct historical evidence, yet the sophistication of the site suggests that its builders possessed an impressive understanding of astronomy, landscape, and architecture. At the center of this mystery lies the most famous feature of Chankillo, a remarkable structure known today as the 13 Towers. Stretching across the crest of a rocky ridge, the 13 Towers form a carefully arranged line that extends roughly 300 meters across the desert skyline. Each tower is built from stacked stone and rises several meters above the ridge, creating a distinctive jagged silhouette that can be seen from far away. At first, early explorers and archaeologists struggled to understand their purpose. The towers did not appear to form walls, buildings, or defensive structures. Instead, they stood alone, evenly spaced, as if marking something invisible in the sky. Over time, researchers began to notice a fascinating pattern. When the sun rises over the eastern horizon, it appears in different positions along the line of towers, depending on the time of year. On certain days, the sun emerges between specific gaps. On others, it rises directly above a tower. As the seasons progress, the sunrise slowly shifts along the entire row. At the time of the summer solstice, the sun rises near one end of the alignment. At the winter solstice, it appears near the opposite end. Between these extremes, the sun moves gradually from tower to tower, day after day. This observation revealed something extraordinary. The 13 towers function together as a massive solar calendar built directly into the landscape. By standing at specific observation points and watching where the sun rose along the line of towers, ancient observers could determine the approximate date within the year. The precision of this system is astonishing. Studies suggest that the calendar could track the solar year with an accuracy of only a few days, an impressive achievement for a society that had no telescopes, mechanical instruments, or written astronomical charts. Even more remarkable is the intentional design behind the structure. The spacing of the towers, the slight curvature of the ridge, and the height of the towers themselves appear carefully calculated. This was not a random collection of buildings, but a carefully engineered system designed to interact with the movement of the sun. In effect, the builders of Chankillo transformed the entire ridge into a giant observational instrument, an architectural horizon marker capable of tracking the passage of time through sunlight and shadow. Yet the towers are only one part of the story. Just below the ridge lies another structure that has puzzled archaeologists for decades, a large and heavily fortified complex, often referred to as the Chankillo fortress. At first glance, the fortress appears to be a defensive stronghold. Thick stone walls surround a hilltop complex, and narrow entryways lead through a series of enclosed corridors and gates. The layout seems deliberately confusing, forcing anyone entering the structure to follow a winding path through multiple layers of walls. However, the more researchers studied this fortress, the more unusual it appeared. Unlike many known military fortifications of the ancient Andes, the Chankillo complex does not sit in an especially strategic defensive position. It does not guard a major trade route or overlook an important settlement. Furthermore, the defensive features, while impressive, seem almost exaggerated compared to the apparent scale of conflict in the region at that time. This has led some archaeologists to question whether the fortress was truly a military installation at all. Instead, it may have served a ceremonial or political function connected to the solar observatory itself. The complex might have been a restricted sacred space accessible only to elite priests or leaders who were responsible for observing the sun and interpreting its movements. The maze-like corridors could have created a sense of ritual separation, turning the act of entering the complex into a symbolic journey. If this interpretation is correct, the fortress and the towers together formed part of a much larger ceremonial landscape. The towers marked the movement of the sun across the horizon, while the fortress served as the center of authority, where knowledge of the sky was controlled and interpreted. In many ancient societies, astronomical knowledge was closely linked to religious power. Those who could predict the cycles of the sun, moon, and stars often held significant influence within their communities. The discovery of Chankillo has also transformed the way scholars understand ancient astronomy in the Americas. For many years, researchers believed that complex solar observatories appeared relatively late in Andean civilization, particularly during the time of the Inca. However, Chankillo predates the Inca Empire by more than 1,000 years. This means that advanced solar observation systems existed much earlier than previously believed. Because of its clear and systematic alignment with the solar year, many scholars now consider Chankillo to be the oldest known solar observatory in the Americas. While other ancient cultures around the world created monuments aligned with the sun, such as Stonehenge in Britain or certain temples in Egypt, few sites demonstrate such a complete and continuous solar tracking system across the entire year. What makes Chankillo particularly remarkable is that the towers function together as a continuous horizon calendar. Instead of marking only a few key events, like solstices or equinoxes, the system appears capable of indicating the sun's position throughout almost every day of the year. In essence, it allowed ancient observers to watch time itself move slowly across the desert skyline. The implications of this discovery are profound. In agricultural societies, knowing the timing of seasonal cycles was essential for survival. The ability to predict the return of planting seasons, rainfall patterns, and harvest periods could determine the success or failure of entire communities. A solar calendar, like the one at Chankillo, may have provided a reliable way to coordinate agricultural activities across the region. Yet the purpose of the site may have extended beyond agriculture. In many ancient cultures, the sun was not merely a source of light, but a powerful divine force. Its movements across the sky symbolized order renewal and cosmic balance. The construction of a massive solar observatory may therefore have carried deep spiritual meaning. Rituals, ceremonies, and festivals could have been timed according to the sun's position along the towers, reinforcing the connection between celestial cycles and human society. Despite decades of research, many questions about Chankillo remain unanswered. The identity of the culture that built it is still debated, and the full extent of the surrounding settlement is not yet completely understood. Archaeologists continue to investigate the area, hoping to uncover more clues about the people who designed this extraordinary landscape. What is clear, however, is that Chankillo represents an astonishing achievement in ancient science and architecture. In a remote desert thousands of years ago, a forgotten civilization built a structure that could track the passage of the sun across the entire year using nothing more than stone landscape and careful observation of the sky. Today, as the sun still rises over the desert ridge, its light moves slowly from tower to tower, just as it did more than 2 millennia ago. The towers of Chankillo remain silent witnesses to a sophisticated understanding of time astronomy and cosmic order, an ancient calendar carved into the horizon itself, reminding us that even in the distant past, human beings were already watching the sky with remarkable precision and wonder. Hidden among the forested hills of Sintra, one of Europe's most mysterious architectural structures lies concealed within the gardens of Quinta da Regalera. Visitors wandering through the estate may at first notice ornate towers, carved stone terraces, and winding pathways that seem to belong to a dreamlike medieval landscape. Yet the most unusual structure here is not a tower rising proudly above the ground. Instead, it descends silently into darkness. Known today as the Initiation Well, this strange structure is often called the Inverted Tower of Sintra, a name that perfectly captures its unsettling design, a tower built downward into the earth rather than upward into the sky. From above, the structure appears as a circular stone opening, surrounded by moss-covered walls and dense greenery. But looking down reveals something far more extraordinary. A spiraling staircase clings to the inner wall of a deep cylindrical shaft that drops roughly 27 meters into the ground. The staircase wraps around the interior like a stone serpent, forming a dramatic spiral that appears to pull the viewer toward the depths below. Unlike ordinary wells built for water, this one contains no bucket, no pulley, and no trace of hydraulic purpose. It is not a well in the practical sense at all. Instead, it resembles a subterranean tower, an architectural inversion that challenges expectations and invites speculation about its true purpose. The design itself is mesmerizing. 9 levels of stone arches divide the spiral descent into a sequence of circular terraces, each connected by narrow staircases that twist gradually toward the bottom. Light from above filters down the shaft, illuminating patches of damp stone and creeping moss, while leaving much of the interior in shadow. As visitors descend, the sounds of the outside world slowly fade. The air grows cooler, the light weaker, and the spiral geometry of the staircase begins to create a disorienting effect, as though the traveler is being drawn deeper and deeper into a hidden realm beneath the earth. This unusual architectural form has led many researchers and historians to interpret the structure not as a simple decorative feature, but as a symbolic space. The inverted tower seems to mirror a concept that appears repeatedly In ancient traditions, the ritual descent into the underworld. In myths across cultures, from Mediterranean civilizations to Northern European folklore, the act of descending underground often represents a journey through darkness before rebirth or transformation. The downward spiral of the initiation well echoes this idea with remarkable precision. Rather than climbing toward enlightenment, the traveler must first descend into shadow. At the bottom of the well, the mystery deepens even further. Instead of ending abruptly at a dead stone floor, the structure opens into a network of hidden passages carved through the earth. These narrow tunnels form part of an underground labyrinth that connects several areas of the estate. Some passages lead to artificial grottos where water drips slowly from the rock ceiling. Others emerge unexpectedly beside small lakes, mossy gardens, or concealed stone archways. Moving through these tunnels can feel like navigating a secret world beneath the visible landscape. The tunnels themselves are dimly lit and deliberately winding. Their curved walls and uneven stone floors create an atmosphere closer to ancient ritual spaces than to ordinary architectural corridors. In some places, the path narrows into a tight passage, barely wide enough for one person to walk through comfortably. In others, the tunnel opens into cavern-like chambers where faint light filters in from hidden openings above. These changes in space and lighting seem carefully designed to guide the visitor through alternating sensations of confinement and release. One of the most striking moments occurs when a tunnel suddenly emerges at the edge of a small, underground lake crossed by stepping stones. The water reflects faint light from an opening above, creating shimmering patterns on the stone walls. To reach the other side, a traveler must carefully step across the stones while surrounded by darkness and silence. The experience feels less like crossing a garden feature and more like participating in a symbolic passage moving from one state to another through waterstone and shadow. Such features have encouraged many observers to interpret the entire structure as part of a symbolic journey rather than a simple architectural curiosity. The path downward through the inverted tower, followed by a hidden route through tunnels and caverns, mirrors ancient myths in which heroes or initiates descend into the underworld before returning to the surface transformed. In this interpretation, the darkness of the well represents the symbolic death of the old self, while the eventual emergence into light symbolizes renewal or enlightenment. The deeper symbolism becomes even more intriguing when considered alongside architectural traditions found in ancient ritual landscapes. Across many cultures, sacred spaces were designed to replicate cosmic journeys, movements between heaven-earth and the underworld. Pyramids, burial chambers, temple corridors, and underground sanctuaries often guided participants through carefully controlled sequences of darkness and illumination. The inverted tower of Sintra appears to recreate a similar experience through its spiral descent and hidden passageways. The spiral staircase itself reinforces this interpretation. Spirals are among the oldest symbolic shapes used in human culture, appearing in prehistoric carvings, megalithic monuments, and sacred architecture around the world. The form often represents cycles of transformation, the movement of time, or the path of spiritual development. Descending a spiral can therefore symbolize entering a deeper level of understanding or passing through layers of reality. Within the initiation well, the spiral staircase becomes the central element guiding that journey downward. Another remarkable aspect of the structure is the careful balance between architecture and landscape. The well and tunnels do not appear abruptly within the garden, but are subtly integrated into the natural terrain. Moss vines and damp stone blur the boundary between constructed space and the surrounding forest. Over time, nature has partially reclaimed the structure, giving it the appearance of something far older than its true age. The result is an atmosphere that feels timeless, as though the tower had been hidden beneath the earth for centuries, waiting to be rediscovered. Because of this atmosphere, the inverted tower has often been compared to mythical entrances to the underworld, described in ancient literature and folklore. Many such stories describe caves, wells, or deep shafts as portals between worlds. In Greek mythology, entrances to Hades were sometimes believed to lie in remote landscapes marked by strange geological formations. In Celtic traditions, wells and springs were often treated as sacred gateways, connecting the human world with spiritual realms. The structure at Sintra echoes these ancient concepts with striking clarity. The journey through the tower and tunnels therefore becomes more than a physical movement through space. It resembles a symbolic narrative carved into architecture: descent, darkness, uncertainty, passage through hidden corridors, and eventual return to the surface world. Each stage mirrors themes found in initiation rituals, mythological quests, and ancient spiritual journeys. Even for modern visitors who know the historical background of the estate, the experience can feel strangely timeless, as though participating in a ritual that predates recorded history. Standing once again at the surface after emerging from the underground passages, many visitors turn back to look at the circular opening of the tower. From above, it appears calm and almost ordinary, just another stone structure hidden in the garden landscape. Yet beneath that opening lies a carefully designed descent into shadow, a labyrinth of tunnels, and a symbolic path that echoes ancient ideas about transformation and rebirth. Whether viewed as architectural symbolism, artistic expression, or an echo of forgotten ritual traditions, the inverted Tower of Sintra remains one of the most enigmatic spaces in Europe, a place where architecture invites every visitor to follow a path that leads not upward toward the sky, but downward into the mysteries beneath the earth. Hidden deep within the rugged mountains of southwestern Colombia lies one of the most enigmatic archaeological landscapes in the Americas. Today known as Tierradentro, this remote highland region preserves a remarkable collection of underground tombs carved directly into the earth. These subterranean chambers, known as hypogea, descend several meters below the surface through spiral staircases and open into carefully shaped burial rooms. While their architecture alone is impressive, the true mystery of Tierradentro lies not only in the engineering of these underground structures, but in the strange visual language painted across their walls and in the silent stone figures that appear to guard this forgotten necropolis. Together, these elements form a puzzle that archaeologists and historians are still struggling to understand. Inside many of the hypogea, the walls and ceilings are covered with striking geometric paintings. The colors are simple, yet powerful: deep red, dark black, and bright white. These pigments form repeating patterns that wind across column ceilings and curved walls. Some shapes resemble zigzags or spirals, while others appear like stylized faces or symbolic forms that resist easy interpretation. At first glance, the designs might appear decorative, but their consistency suggests something far more deliberate. The same patterns appear again and again in different tombs across the region, implying that they were part of a shared symbolic system used by the people who built these underground chambers. What makes these paintings particularly mysterious is that their meaning has never been definitively explained. Unlike the written inscriptions found in other ancient cultures, the Tierradentro symbols offer no clear translation. They exist as a visual code without a known key. Some researchers believe the patterns may represent cosmological ideas, possibly reflecting how the ancient inhabitants of this region understood the structure of the universe. The spirals and repeating lines could symbolize cycles of life and death, or the journey of the soul into the afterlife. Others have suggested that the painted columns inside the tombs resemble stylized human figures, transforming the burial chamber itself into a symbolic gathering of ancestral spirits. Another intriguing feature is how carefully the designs were applied. The patterns follow the architecture of the chambers with remarkable precision. Lines curve naturally along the walls and wrap around columns as though the artists were deliberately integrating art and structure into a single, unified design. This level of planning suggests that the paintings were not added casually after the tombs were carved, but were instead part of a carefully conceived ritual space. The hypogea may have functioned not only as burial chambers, but as sacred environments where the living interacted with the spiritual world. Yet the mystery deepens when researchers consider how these paintings have survived for centuries in underground conditions. The pigments remain surprisingly vivid despite the passage of time. This durability hints at a sophisticated knowledge of natural minerals and binding materials. The people who created these works likely understood how to mix pigments capable of enduring humidity and darkness for generations. However, because the culture responsible for these tombs left behind no written explanation of their methods, modern scholars can only speculate about the techniques involved. Beyond the painted chambers themselves, another powerful and puzzling presence can be found throughout the Tierradentro landscape, a series of ancient stone statues. These figures stand scattered across the hills surrounding the burial complexes. Carved from large blocks of stone, the statues depict human-like forms with stylized features. Many have large, wide eyes and rigid expressions that give them an almost otherworldly appearance. Their bodies are often simplified into geometric shapes, echoing the abstract patterns found inside the tombs below the ground. The purpose of these statues remains uncertain, but their placement suggests they may have served as guardians of the sacred landscape. Some stand near entrances to burial areas, as if watching over the resting places of the dead. Others appear positioned along ancient pathways that might once have guided ritual processions across the mountains. Their silent presence raises the possibility that the statues were intended to represent protective spirits, ancestral figures, or mythological beings connected to the beliefs of the people who built the hypogea. In many ancient cultures, stone figures served as intermediaries between the human world and the realm of spirits. The statues of Tierradentro may have fulfilled a similar role. Their exaggerated eyes could symbolize supernatural vision, suggesting beings capable of watching both the living and the dead. If the painted chambers underground represented the journey of the soul, then the statues above ground might have marked the boundary between worlds. Together, they create a symbolic landscape in which art, architecture, and ritual merge into a single cultural expression. Another element that deepens the mystery is the anonymity of the civilization that created all of this. When Spanish explorers arrived in the region during the 16th century, the people living there were not constructing tombs like these. The culture responsible for the hypogea and the statues had already faded from the historical record. Without written accounts or surviving traditions explaining the meaning of the symbols and sculptures, archaeologists are left with fragments of a story that remains incomplete. This absence of historical context transforms Tierradentro into a kind of archaeological riddle. The underground paintings appear to communicate something important, yet their message has been lost. The statues stand like silent witnesses to rituals that no one alive remembers. Every chamber, every pattern, and every carved face hints at a complex belief system that once shaped life in these mountains. Today, researchers continue to study the site in hopes of uncovering new clues. Advances in archaeology, pigment analysis, and cultural comparison may eventually reveal more about the techniques and ideas behind the paintings and statues. But for now, Tierradentro remains one of the most intriguing ancient mysteries in the Americas. Beneath the quiet hills of Colombia, spiral staircases still descend into painted chambers where geometric patterns stretch across the walls like messages from a vanished world. Above the ground, stone figures continue their silent vigil, standing against wind and time. Together, they form a haunting reminder that long before modern history began, a forgotten culture transformed this remote mountain landscape into a place where art, death, and belief were woven together in ways that we are only beginning to glimpse. Hidden on the edge of the desert, near the fertile basin of the Fayum, lies a pyramid that for centuries looked less like a royal monument and more like a strange, dark mound rising from the sand. Travelers passing through the region during the 19th century often noticed the unusual ruin near the modern village of Kahun, but few realized that beneath the eroded mass of mud brick and debris rested one of the most intriguing pyramids of ancient Egypt. Early explorers and archaeologists were puzzled by its appearance. Unlike the elegant stone pyramids of Giza, this structure seemed darker, rougher, and partially collapsed, as if time had stripped away its original form. Because of the dark color of the exposed core, researchers later began referring to it as the Black Pyramid of El Kahun, a name that would only deepen the mystery surrounding the monument. Serious archaeological investigation of the site began during the late 19th century, when the famous British archaeologist Flinders Petrie conducted excavations in the region. Petrie was already known for his systematic methods, and what he uncovered at El Kahun revealed that the strange ruin was not simply another pyramid, but part of a much larger and highly organized royal complex. The monument had been built nearly 4,000 years ago for the pharaoh Senusret II, one of the rulers of Egypt's powerful Middle Kingdom of Egypt. Yet the more archaeologists studied the structure, the more unusual it appeared compared to earlier pyramids. Almost every aspect of its design seemed to challenge traditional expectations about how Egyptian pyramids were supposed to be built. One of the first mysteries lies in the very material used to construct the pyramid. The Great Pyramids of earlier dynasties, including those at Giza Pyramid Complex, were built primarily from enormous limestone blocks, carefully cut and stacked with astonishing precision. The pyramid at El Kahun, however, was constructed using a very different approach. Its core was made largely from mud brick, reinforced by a framework of stone walls and filled with sand and rubble. Originally, the structure was covered with smooth white limestone casing, which would have reflected sunlight and given the pyramid a brilliant appearance visible across the desert. Over centuries, however, much of that outer casing was removed or collapsed, leaving the darker mud brick core exposed. This transformation turned what was once a shining monument into the shadowy ruin that inspired the name Black Pyramid. The choice of mud brick has long puzzled researchers. Why would a pharaoh choose a less durable material for his pyramid? Some scholars believe the design allowed faster construction, while others suggest it represented a new architectural experiment during the Middle Kingdom. The pyramid's entrance presents another unusual feature. In most earlier pyramids, the entrance passage is located on the northern face, aligning symbolically with the circumpolar stars that the Egyptians associated with eternity and the afterlife. At El Kahun, however, the entrance was hidden on the southern side of the pyramid. This deviation from tradition appears deliberate, and many archaeologists believe it may have been an attempt to confuse tomb robbers. The internal layout reinforces this idea. Instead of a simple descending corridor leading directly toward the burial chamber, the pyramid contains a network of twisting passages, hidden corridors, and chambers arranged in a way that seems intentionally confusing. Large stone blocking slabs once sealed certain sections of the tunnels, forcing anyone attempting to penetrate the pyramid to navigate a complicated underground maze. At the heart of this labyrinth lies the burial chamber of Senusret II. Yet even this chamber does not occupy the central axis of the pyramid, another break from earlier pyramid traditions. Instead, the burial chamber was placed slightly off-center and concealed deep within the structure. This unusual positioning has led some historians to believe that the architects were deliberately trying to create a more secure tomb after centuries of pyramid robberies had plagued earlier monuments. When archaeologists finally explored the chamber, they discovered a granite sarcophagus carved with impressive precision. Although the tomb had been robbed in antiquity, the chamber itself revealed important clues about Middle Kingdom funerary practices and the evolving strategies used to protect royal burials. Surrounding the pyramid complex were additional structures that reveal even more about the world in which the monument was built. Near the pyramid lies the remarkable archaeological site of Kahun, an ancient workers' town established to house the laborers, engineers, and artisans involved in constructing the royal complex. Unlike many ancient settlements that grew organically over time, Kahun was carefully planned with straight streets, organized housing blocks, and administrative buildings. Excavations at the site uncovered everyday objects such as tools, pottery, and even written documents that provide rare insight into daily life in ancient Egypt. Through these discoveries, archaeologists were able to reconstruct details of how workers lived, how labor was organized, and how large construction projects were managed nearly 4,000 years ago. Despite more than a century of research, the Black Pyramid of El Lahun continues to raise questions. The decision to use mud brick construction remains debated, as does the unusual placement of the entrance and burial chamber. Some researchers believe the pyramid reflects a transitional phase in Egyptian pyramid design, when architects experimented with new structural methods and new strategies to protect royal tombs. Others suspect that certain parts of the internal structure may still remain unexplored, hidden beneath collapsed passages or layers of debris that accumulated over millennia. Today, the pyramid stands as a weathered ruin, rising quietly from the desert edge, far less famous than the monumental pyramids to the north. Yet in many ways, it is even more fascinating. It represents a moment when Egyptian architecture was evolving, when engineers and architects were experimenting with new ideas about construction security and monumentality. The dark core of the pyramid, exposed after centuries of erosion, serves as a reminder that the monuments of the ancient world were not static creations, but living structures shaped by time, environment, and human ambition. For historians and archaeologists, the Black Pyramid of El Lahun remains more than a crumbling monument. It is a puzzle from the Middle Kingdom, a structure that challenges assumptions about how pyramids were designed and why they were built the way they were. Beneath its weathered slopes may still lie hidden chambers, forgotten passages, or clues to architectural techniques that remain poorly understood. As long as those questions persist, the Black Pyramid will continue to stand as one of the quiet yet compelling mysteries of ancient Egypt, a monument whose secrets have not yet been fully revealed. On the rugged northern coast of Ireland lies one of the most visually astonishing landscapes on Earth. Stretching from the cliffs into the cold waters of the Atlantic Ocean, thousands of perfectly shaped stone pillars rise from the ground like the remains of a lost geometric structure. This remarkable place, known as Giant's Causeway, consists of more than 40,000 interlocking basalt columns arranged so precisely that at first glance they appear almost artificial. For centuries, travelers, historians, and scientists alike have stood among these strange formations and asked the same question: how could nature create something so mathematically ordered? The most striking feature of the site is the extraordinary geometry of the stones themselves. The majority of the columns are shaped as nearly perfect hexagons. Standing side by side, they form a natural pavement that resembles a massive honeycomb carved directly into the coastline. Many of these pillars reach heights of 10 to 12 meters, while others create flat stepping surfaces that stretch toward the sea like an enormous pathway. Although hexagons dominate the landscape, some columns possess 4, 5, 7, or even 8 sides. Yet the overwhelming presence of 6-sided shapes gives the entire formation a sense of deliberate design, as if an ancient architect had carefully arranged each block to interlock flawlessly with its neighbors. When viewed from above, the pattern appears so consistent that it resembles a giant tiled floor extending across the shoreline. This near-perfect geometric repetition has fascinated observers for generations. Long before the development of modern geology, people struggled to imagine a natural process capable of producing such precise symmetry on such a massive scale. The stones appear almost engineered, with straight vertical edges and flat polygonal tops that fit together like pieces of an enormous puzzle. Even today, visitors often describe the landscape as looking less like a natural rock formation and more like the ruins of a forgotten civilization. The impression becomes even stronger when walking across the columns themselves, because they form natural steps that allow people to traverse the coastline as if they were following a carefully built stone road. It was precisely this unusual appearance that gave the site its name and its most famous legend. According to ancient Irish folklore, the causeway was not created by natural forces at all, but by a giant hero known as Fionn mac Cumhail. In the mythology of Ireland, Fionn was a warrior of immense strength who protected the land and its people. The story tells that he once challenged a rival giant who lived across the sea in Scotland. Determined to confront his enemy, Fionn built a massive stone pathway stretching across the ocean so that he could walk directly to his opponent's territory. The pathway was constructed from thousands of enormous stones laid carefully together, forming the giant causeway that still remains today. The legend continues with a clever twist. When Fionn finally saw the enormous size of the Scottish giant, he realized the battle might not end in his favor. His wife devised a plan to protect him. She disguised Fionn as a baby and placed him inside a cradle. When the Scottish giant arrived and saw the child, he imagined how enormous the father must be if the baby was already so large. Terrified by the thought of facing such a colossal opponent, the rival giant fled back across the sea, destroying much of the stone path behind him. In his panic, only fragments of the causeway remained, leaving the strange stone columns that still line the coast of Ireland today. While this story belongs to the realm of myth, it reflects how deeply the unusual landscape impressed ancient people. To them, the geometry of the stones seemed too extraordinary to be explained by ordinary natural forces. Instead, it inspired tales of giants, heroes, and impossible feats of construction. These myths became an essential part of Irish cultural identity, transforming the landscape into a place where folklore and physical geography blend together in a single narrative. Centuries later, however, scholars and scientists began to investigate the formation more carefully. During the 18th and 19th centuries, the site became the center of an intense scientific debate. Natural philosophers and early geologists traveled to the remote Irish coastline to examine the mysterious columns and propose explanations for their origin. At the time, geology was still a developing field, and many fundamental questions about Earth's processes remained unresolved. Some researchers argued that the stones formed through volcanic activity, suggesting that ancient lava flows had cooled and cracked into polygonal shapes. Others believed the columns had developed through chemical crystallization, imagining that minerals in water gradually solidified into geometric forms. The debate continued for decades, with scientists presenting competing theories and examining the site in greater detail. The remarkably regular shapes of the columns made the problem especially puzzling. Natural rock formations often produce irregular fractures, yet here the columns appeared uniform and orderly across an enormous area. Eventually, advances in geological understanding revealed the most convincing explanation. The columns were formed millions of years ago, when molten basaltic lava erupted across the region and spread over the landscape. As the lava cooled, it began to contract. This contraction created tension within the solidifying rock, causing it to fracture. Under the right conditions, the cracks spread outward in patterns that naturally favored hexagonal shapes, similar to the way drying mud sometimes forms polygonal patterns. Even with this explanation, the Giant's Causeway remains one of the most spectacular demonstrations of natural geometry on Earth. The cooling lava produced thousands of nearly identical columns standing side by side, each one separated by narrow cracks, yet fitting perfectly with its neighbors. The result is a landscape that appears both natural and strangely architectural at the same time. It is a rare moment in geology when the forces of nature create something that looks so deliberate that people instinctively search for hidden builders or lost civilizations. Today, visitors who walk across the basalt columns often experience the same sense of wonder that inspired ancient myths and early scientific debates. Standing among the towering hexagonal pillars, it is easy to imagine how generations of observers once believed they were seeing the remains of a giant's pathway or the foundations of an impossible structure. The Giant's Causeway continues to blur the boundary between myth and science, reminding us that even in the modern age, nature still has the power to produce landscapes so extraordinary that they challenge our expectations of what the Earth itself can create. Across the vast savannas of West Africa, long before written history recorded the rise of kingdoms and empires, an ancient culture quietly flourished in what is now central Nigeria. Known today as the Nok culture, this civilization existed more than 2,000 years ago and left behind one of the most remarkable artistic legacies in early African history. Among the artifacts discovered by archaeologists, none are more intriguing than a group of terracotta sculptures distinguished by a striking and unusual feature: elongated, elegant necks that seem to stretch beyond natural human proportions. These so-called long-neck statues of the Nok culture have fascinated researchers, historians, and anthropologists for decades, not only because of their beauty, but because they hint at symbolic meanings and technical abilities that remain partly unexplained. At first glance, the statues appear both familiar and otherworldly. Their bodies are human, their faces expressive, yet their proportions seem deliberately altered. The necks often extend far beyond realistic anatomy, sometimes decorated with a series of carefully carved rings or bands that encircle the throat. These rings resemble stacked necklaces or ritual ornaments, suggesting that the feature was not simply a stylistic exaggeration, but an intentional symbol. The sculptors clearly wanted viewers to focus on this unusual part of the body. In many pieces, the neck becomes the central visual axis of the figure, connecting the head to the torso, like a ceremonial pillar. This artistic emphasis raises an immediate question: why would an ancient culture repeatedly depict the human form with such dramatically elongated necks? One possibility is that the long neck represented status or prestige within Nok society. In many cultures around the world, body modification or adornment has been used to signify social rank, spiritual authority, or cultural identity. The carved rings around the necks of these statues may symbolize elaborate jewelry, worn by important individuals, perhaps priests, leaders, or members of a ritual elite. If so, the exaggerated length could represent not literal anatomy, but symbolic elevation, a visual metaphor for someone standing between the human world and the spiritual realm. In ancient belief systems, the body often served as a map of cosmic relationships, and the neck linking the head and the heart could have been interpreted as a channel between thought breath and life force. By elongating it, the sculptor might have been emphasizing a connection to something beyond ordinary human experience. Another interpretation suggests a spiritual or ritual meaning behind the elongated form. The statues may represent ancestors, deities, or mythological beings, rather than ordinary people. In this context, the extended neck could symbolize transcendence or transformation, indicating that the figure belongs partly to the world of spirits. Across many ancient traditions, the human body is altered in art to express supernatural qualities. Just as Egyptian statues emphasized idealized symmetry and calm authority, or Mayan sculptures highlighted elaborate headdresses and ceremonial attire, Nok artists may have used the long neck to represent spiritual power. The repetition of the motif across many sculptures suggests that it was not an accidental aesthetic choice, but a deliberate visual language understood by those who created and viewed these works. Equally mysterious is the extraordinary technical skill required to produce these statues. The Nok sculptures were made from terracotta, a form of fired clay that must be carefully shaped, dried, and baked at high temperatures. Creating a simple clay figure is relatively straightforward, but producing large, stable sculptures with thin, elongated structures like the Nok necks requires remarkable precision. Clay is fragile before firing, and long vertical forms can easily collapse or crack if not properly balanced and supported. Yet the Nok artisans managed to create figures with elongated necks, detailed faces, and intricate decorations without the benefit of modern tools or kilns. This suggests that they possessed a sophisticated understanding of clay preparation, sculpting techniques, and firing processes. Many of the surviving statues display an astonishing level of detail. The eyes are often carved into distinctive triangular or almond shapes with small openings that pierce through the clay, possibly serving both artistic and practical purposes by reducing stress during firing. Hairstyles are rendered with complex geometric patterns, while clothing, jewelry, and ornaments are carefully modeled in relief. The rings around the elongated necks are particularly striking, each band evenly spaced and smoothly integrated into the structure of the sculpture. Achieving such uniformity would have required steady hands, careful planning, and a deep familiarity with the properties of the material. These were not crude or experimental objects. They were the products of a well-developed artistic tradition. What makes this achievement even more impressive is the age of the Nok culture itself. Archaeological evidence suggests that these sculptures were produced as early as the first millennium before the Common Era, making them among the oldest known examples of large-scale figurative sculpture in sub-Saharan Africa. At a time when many parts of the world were only beginning to experiment with metallurgy and complex artistic forms, the Nok people were already creating expressive terracotta figures that reveal a mature aesthetic vision. The elongated neck statues demonstrate not only technical mastery, but also a strong sense of style and symbolism, indicating that Nok artists were working within a cultural system that valued artistic expression and visual storytelling. The process of making such sculptures likely involved several stages. First, clay would have been collected from local deposits and carefully purified to remove stones and impurities. The artist would then shape the figure by hand, gradually building the form from the base upward. Because the neck was unusually long, the sculptor would need to ensure that the internal structure of the clay could support its own weight. Some researchers believe that parts of the sculpture may have been hollowed out or reinforced to prevent collapse during drying. After shaping the figure and carving its decorative details, the sculpture would be left to dry slowly before being fired in an open kiln or pit furnace. Controlling the heat during firing was crucial. Too much temperature variation could cause the clay to crack, while insufficient heat would leave the object fragile and incomplete. The survival of these statues over thousands of years is itself remarkable. Clay, though durable once fired, is vulnerable to erosion burial conditions and accidental breakage. Many Nok sculptures have been discovered only as fragments, a head here, a torso there, suggesting that the complete figures were once much more numerous, even in fragmentary form. However, the elongated neck remains one of the most recognizable and distinctive elements. It continues to capture the imagination of modern viewers, standing as a visual signature of a civilization that left few written clues about its beliefs or social structure. In the end, the long-neck statues of the Nok culture remain powerful reminders of how much ancient history still lies hidden beneath the surface of the earth. Their stretched proportions and intricate craftsmanship invite us to imagine the hands that shaped them and the cultural meanings they once carried. Were they sacred images placed in shrines, portraits of revered ancestors, symbols of spiritual transformation? Archaeology may eventually uncover more clues, but for now, the statues speak in the silent language of art. Through their elongated necks and finely crafted clay forms, they reveal a society capable of extraordinary creativity and technical skill, a society whose mysteries continue to echo across the centuries. Across the ancient landscape of the Jordan Valley, few places carry the weight of time quite like Jericho. Often described as one of the oldest continuously inhabited settlements on Earth, Jericho has witnessed the rise and fall of countless cultures for more than 10,000 years. Beneath its desert sun lie layers of human history stacked upon one another like pages in an unfinished chronicle. Archaeologists have uncovered massive Neolithic towers, ancient city walls, ritual skulls coated in plaster, and the remnants of forgotten communities. Yet scattered along the slopes beyond the main settlement lies a far quieter but equally intriguing chapter of this long story, the mysterious Rame tombs. Carved into the rocky landscape near the ancient mound of Tel es Sultan, these burial chambers offer a glimpse into the funerary traditions of people who lived thousands of years ago, and they raise subtle but compelling questions about architecture, trade, and cultural exchange in the ancient Near East. At first glance, The Rameh tombs appear simple openings cut into pale limestone hillsides overlooking the plains around Jericho. But closer examination reveals a remarkable level of planning and craftsmanship. The tombs were not built as freestanding monuments, but were instead carved directly into the natural rock, transforming the hillside itself into a silent necropolis. Ancient workers would have had to carefully chisel away layers of stone, using primitive tools, gradually shaping entrances, corridors, and burial chambers deep within the rock face. This technique required patience, coordination, and a clear architectural vision long before the first burial ever took place. Each chamber was designed with specific recesses carved into the walls, narrow niches, known as loculi, where the bodies of the dead could be placed. In some tombs, several of these niches line the interior walls, suggesting that the chambers were intended for multiple burials over time rather than a single individual. The design of these rock-cut tombs suggests something even more intriguing. They may have served as family burial chambers used across generations. Instead of a single funeral, marking the end of a structure's purpose, these tombs likely remained open and accessible for decades, perhaps even centuries. As members of a family died, their remains would be placed alongside those who came before them, creating a physical link between generations. This practice reflects a worldview in which the dead were not entirely separated from the living, but remained part of a continuous lineage. The tomb itself became a kind of ancestral house carved in stone, a place where memory and identity were preserved beneath the earth. Such rock-cut burial architecture was not unique to Jericho, but the presence of these tombs in one of the world's oldest urban landscapes gives them special significance. Jericho had already been inhabited for thousands of years by the time these tombs were carved, and the society responsible for them was part of a long cultural evolution stretching back to prehistoric communities. The Rameh tombs therefore stand at a crossroads between ancient traditions and emerging social structures. Their construction suggests a community capable of organized labor, skilled stonework, and carefully planned funerary rituals, features often associated with societies that had already developed complex social hierarchies. Inside several of the tombs, archaeologists have discovered objects placed beside the deceased. These funerary offerings, or grave goods, provide one of the most fascinating clues about the people who built the tombs. Among the items found were ceramic vessels, decorative beads, and small personal ornaments. Some of the pottery appears finely crafted, its surfaces shaped and fired with techniques that required both technical knowledge and artistic skill. These objects were not simply practical items left behind by accident. They were intentionally placed within the tombs as part of the burial ritual. In many ancient cultures, such offerings were meant to accompany the dead into the afterlife, providing nourishment, protection, or symbolic wealth beyond death. What makes these discoveries particularly intriguing is that some of the artifacts do not appear to originate solely from the local region. Certain pottery styles and materials resemble objects found in distant parts of the Levant and neighboring areas. This suggests that the community living in Jericho during the time of the Rameh tombs may have been connected to wider trade networks extending far beyond the oasis city itself. Goods, ideas, and artistic influences may have traveled along routes linking desert settlements, coastal cities, and inland valleys. If this interpretation is correct, the humble burial chambers of Rameh could represent evidence of a much larger economic and cultural web stretching across the ancient Near East. Such connections challenge older assumptions, about early societies in this region. For many years, historians imagined communities like those around Jericho as relatively isolated agricultural settlements. Yet the presence of non-local artifacts hints at a more dynamic reality. Traders may have moved along caravan routes, carrying ceramics, textiles, oils, or metals between distant regions. Cultural styles could have spread along these same paths, influencing how people crafted their pottery or adorned their jewelry. Even small objects buried beside the dead can therefore reveal traces of journeys that once crossed deserts and valleys thousands of years ago. Equally fascinating is the way the Rameh tombs reflect broader burial traditions across the ancient Levant. Throughout this region, rock-cut tombs were a common form of burial architecture, particularly during the Bronze and early Iron Ages. Similar chambers have been found in places as diverse as hillside settlements, desert cliffs, and ancient cities scattered across modern Israel, Palestine, Jordan, and Syria. These tombs often share common features: carved chambers, multiple burial niches, and the repeated use of the same tomb for members of a family or community. The Rameh tombs appear to fit within this broader tradition, suggesting that the people of Jericho were part of a shared cultural landscape that extended across much of the eastern Mediterranean. Yet Jericho itself makes the story even more remarkable. Few places in the world possess such an extraordinarily deep archaeological record. At Tel Es Sultan, excavations have revealed settlement layers dating back to around 9000 BCE. Early inhabitants constructed one of the world's first known stone towers and defensive walls long before the rise of the great civilizations of Egypt or Mesopotamia. Over thousands of years, new communities built their homes upon the remains of those that came before, gradually creating a mound of accumulated history rising above the surrounding plain. Within this context, the Rameh tombs represent yet another chapter in a timeline that stretches across millennia. The burial customs associated with these tombs may also reflect evolving beliefs about death and ancestry. Earlier inhabitants of Jericho practiced striking rituals involving human skulls. In several Neolithic contexts, archaeologists have found skulls that were carefully removed from skeletons and coated with plaster to recreate facial features, sometimes with shells placed in the eye sockets. These objects were likely displayed or preserved as part of ancestor veneration rituals. By the time the Rameh tombs were in use, burial practices appear to have shifted toward more formalized family tombs carved into rock. The transition suggests that ideas about death memory and lineage continued to evolve as Jericho society changed. Standing today among the rocky hills near Jericho, the entrances to these tombs seem almost modest compared with the monumental architecture of other ancient civilizations. There are no towering pyramids or massive temples here, only quiet openings in the stone leading into dark chambers below. Yet within these modest spaces lies a profound story about how ancient people understood life, death, and belonging. The effort required to carve the tombs, the careful placement of grave goods, and the repeated use of the same chambers across generations all point to a society deeply concerned with preserving connections between the living and the dead. In this way, the Rameh tombs serve as a subtle reminder that the ancient world was not defined solely by kings and empires. Much of human history unfolded in communities whose names have long been forgotten, yet whose beliefs and traditions shaped the archaeological traces we discover today. Each carved chamber represents a moment when families gathered to mourn, remember, and honor those who came before them. Each piece of pottery or bead left behind in the darkness of the tomb carries the faint echo of lives once lived in the oasis city nearby. And so, hidden in the limestone hills overlooking one of the oldest cities on Earth, the Rameh tombs remain quiet witnesses to a distant past. They reveal a society capable of careful architecture, connected to broader trade networks, and participating in burial traditions shared across the ancient Levant. At the same time, they remind us how much of this story still lies beyond our full understanding. Beneath the stones of Jericho, countless secrets remain buried, waiting for future discoveries to illuminate the lives of the people who carved these chambers and entrusted their memories to the silence of the earth.